Hi, you are listening to or watching the Optimizing Personal Finance podcast. Thanks for doing that. I'm Tom Mihawk, and I'm doing this podcast to support my teaching activities in personal finance. I'm also a financial advisor. Nothing in this podcast should be taken as financial advice. It's not meant to be, it's meant to be informative. And we are in the second section of the podcast. We're talking about blogs, books, and influencers. Now, when I teach this course, I tell students that I think that you learn basic foundation elements, fundamentals about personal finance. What are stocks? What are bonds? What's inflation? We talked about some of those things, remember, in the first section of this podcast, some things to know, right? How do you do a plan? What are taxes? What is time value of money, and why does it matter? And so you build this foundation information, foundation knowledge, and you add to that where people are discussing topics. They're getting more tactical. What credit card should I get? How should I set up my bank accounts? How should I borrow for a home? Should I lease or should I rent? Or should I buy? Right? These kinds of things. And so we're going to talk about books and blogs and influencers as a way to expand your knowledge in personal finance. So these are among my most recent textbooks that publishers have sent me. I use in my courses now, sorry about that, this Kapoor text. This is the 13th edition. Notice that it comes to me now in a binder format. But that's where you learn foundation, important fundamental things about personal finance. You add to that, in my view, with other kinds of books and podcasts and blogs. These, by the way, that I'm going to show you are not necessarily what I view as the best, although I think they're very good. And that's the subject of another podcast entirely, the best books in personal finance. But the first I want to show you is by Alexa von Tobel. Alexa founded a firm called LearnVest. She promotes it here. There's it right there. And this book, is one of the first ones, believe it or not, where I saw discuss the 50-20-30 program. 50% of your expenses should be on your essentials, 20% on your future, meaning, retirement and that sort of thing, and saving and investing, and then another 30% on your lifestyle, your living. She also talks about negotiating your compensation. One of the first that I read that said, negotiate, negotiate, negotiate going in. This book is maybe 5 years or so old, and it's a great book. I Will Teach You to Be Rich. This is the second edition by Ramit Sethi. Where is his? Well, here's what he looks like. Sethi is very well known online. He, I believe, is a Stanford grad. He writes in very tactical things: savings, checking accounts, spending, save while you're sleeping, that sort of thing. He has a fairly strong view. When you see him on Twitter, Instagram, he is pretty sure about what he describes you should be doing. But he has a lot of great ideas. And Sethi, I think, does a very good job. This is an old, by the way, this book probably just came out in the last year and a half or so. His first edition came out maybe 10 years ago. Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Now, no one would consider this high finance, but what Robert Kiyosaki has done is he's taken a cash flow, we call in personal finance, cash flow statement, and a balance sheet, and shown the relationship between them. And he suggests that the cash flow pattern of an asset is to have the asset flow into the income. You can think of that in terms of maybe dividends you receive, or if you own rental real estate, and where it goes, where the income comes in from rental real estate. He also shows that the cash flow pattern of a liability. The liability would be like, for example, your school loan, and it goes up to expense in the cash flow statement, and the expense would be your monthly payment. It's important to know the difference between assets and income and expenses and liability. Robert Kiyosaki uses the example of a rich dad and a poor dad. I don't know if he's ever said whether these are really, if he really had these or not, but he uses this device to explain a different way to think about money and savings. And he does a good job of it. And he's on, I just saw him on CNBC just, I think, over the weekend, this past weekend. Now, let's talk about some more serious finance texts. Benjamin Graham wrote Intelligent Investor. This was written, well, before 1950, because Warren Buffett was influenced greatly by Ben Graham. He took Ben Graham's course in grad school at Columbia. And this would be considered a description of value investing, where you're buying stocks at lower prices relative to their earnings. But it has influenced many investors. And it's certainly a book worth reading. It influenced one of the best investors that we have today, Warren Buffett. This one was written by David Swensen. It's called Unconventional Success, a Fundamental Approach to Personal Investment. Now, unfortunately, Swensen just passed. I was very sad to hear about this, maybe in the last month. Swensen ran the endowment at Yale University. And, there was a time 25 years ago, 20, when all endowments invested in were U.S. stocks, U.S. bonds, and 5% in cash. Now, because of people like Swensen, maybe primarily because of Swensen, they invest in maybe only 4% stocks. Sorry, that was 4% stocks, U.S. stocks. But they also invest in foreign stocks and bonds and commodities and private equity and hedge funds and absolute return. So Swensen really pioneered the concept of investing in assets that are not correlated, so they're not all doing the same thing. Sorry about that. So they're not all doing the same thing at the same time. And the market's down, they're not all going down. And the market's going up, they're not all going up at the same time. We're getting diversification. This one was written for investors, and he also had one he wrote maybe 8 or 10 years ago for professionals. Now, over here is my collection of other books, and on those bookshelves are books by John Bogle about investing. For Bogle, the founder of Vanguard, those are probably mostly index investing. A book that I was going to pull some of these out, but there are just too many of them. One called Live Rich and Die Broke, and these are by Michael Pollan, and I love those. Those are probably bought in an airport somewhere earlier in my career as I was traveling a lot. There are lots of other personal finance books there. And the key of it is that you want to accumulate foundation knowledge. You want to understand what a financial plan is, what stocks and bonds are, insurance, how does it work? Why do I save for retirement even when I'm 22 or 25? What does estate planning mean? Why do I need a will, and when do I need the will? And then add to it with reading books like this. A lot of the books that I showed you on my bookshelf I probably bought in airports and read on planes, but I read certainly lots of them at home too, and for fun, and had next to my bed, and read them at night before going to sleep, and still have them and refer to them and bring them into the classroom to talk with students about or talk with clients about. Now let's talk about blogs. Blogs are, I don't know when they became popular, but I know I started reading them probably 6 or 8 years ago, maybe 10. Now, well, probably more than that. Tom Peters' blog I probably read 15 or 20 years ago. But I don't even know if they called it a blog then. But blogs are where people write shorter treatments of topics, and but they write them regularly. The culture is to post them daily. One of the first that I really enjoy, let me hold this close enough so you can see the logo. This is called Abnormal Returns. And an abnormal return is in finance definition, is a return greater than what you expect. Surprise, the return that you'd like to get in your investments. This is written by Tadas Visconta, and Tadas does a great job. He's done this for at least 10 years. On Tuesdays, he does personal finance, he does economics, he does long form reading on Fridays. And it's a great way to keep up with personal finance research, topics, thinking, what personal financial advisors do, trends in the industry. It's really well done. Financial Samurai. Financial Samurai, you can see his logo here. Financial Samurai is written by a man who's maybe 40 or so, goes by the name Sam Dogan. I don't know if that's his name or not. He attended undergrad at William and Mary, finished an MBA, I forget now, maybe UCLA or Berkeley, I don't remember, UCal Berkeley. And what he did, though, is he went to work in New York City for Goldman Sachs, transferred to San Francisco, closer to where he's from. He was born in Hawaii. And he quit working in his young 30s, and he's been independent since then. He writes this blog, posts every day or every other day. I think he has a podcast too where he records what he's written and posted at his blog. He writes great stuff about real estate, savings, how much you should be worth at a certain age or could be worth, earnings, taxes. He does a really good job. Financial Samurai. Making Sense of Sense. Making Sense of Sense is written by a woman named, a youngish woman. She's probably in her, well, maybe she's 30-ish now. Michelle Gardner, or Michelle Schroeder Gardner, or Gardner Schroeder. But she and her husband both, you can see them both in this in the cover of the blog. And by the way, the reason I'm showing you on my phone is I realized that recording this through PowerPoint, I wasn't going to be able to show you this online, so I had to use my phone. But in Making Sense of Sense, has traditionally been very forthcoming about how much she makes with her blog. She started out maybe 8 years ago or so, maybe 10, and made nothing for the beginning, and very little for the first few years. And now she makes, I think, over $100,000 a month. I believe, if not mistaken, she makes maybe as much as $1.5 million on her blog. She lives wherever she wants. She and her husband both had finance jobs that they didn't like, and they quit to live and travel. She writes the blog, and that provides the support that they need for their lifestyle. Two others I want to point out to you: Mr. Money Mustache and White Coat Investor. Mr. Money Mustache is a frugalist. He doesn't go to a gym. He lifts weights by lifting concrete blocks in his backyard. But his blog is very well put together. It's been around for a long time. If you are looking for ways to save money, try Mr. Money Mustache. White Coat Investor is a emergency room doc, and he's expanded into teaching and newsletters and training and advisory. I believe he's still an emergency room doctor, which means he doesn't have call. He works maybe not a 9 to 5, but he doesn't work 36 hours straight. And because of that, he had the time to develop other passions like his interest in personal finance. Now I want to talk to you about 3 influencers and then wrap this section up. Dave Ramsey. He's known on AM radio, FM radio. He's on television. He has a website. Does a great job. Ramsey, in his middle 20s, invested in lots of real estate. Says that his bank was foreclosing or had some problem and caused him to foreclose. He said he was curled up in a fetal position and didn't know how he was going to keep his properties because they were all borrowed against. That's how he bought them. And he, because of that, speaks about not having any debt. So if you listen to him on the radio, you'll find out that he recommends everyone have no debt. Now, we'll talk about this in another section of the course, not necessarily the introduction course, but maybe Module 2 or Module 3 in another course. There's good debt and bad debt. And good debt would be something like borrowing maybe to go to college, depending on how much. Borrowing to own a home, for example, again, depending on how much and where. But Ramsey talks about not having any debt, and that's a very strong theme in his advice. Susie Orman, you probably know, blonde hair, bright white smile, bright white teeth. She was an advisor, I believe, at Prudential, and then broke into doing television. She's done a bunch of books. She talks about empowerment, talks about retirement. She's very positive. And Susie Orman, you can see often on public television, I think on Saturdays. She has also an Instagram site, probably Twitter, and she's good. Ramit Sethi is who wrote the book I told you about before, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. Sethi is available on Twitter, Instagram, strong views, but very good ideas. He was one of the few that were broadcasting regularly during COVID about a year ago, and he found a way to do a recorded broadcast on Instagram, I believe, and he did a great job. So I'm going to wrap this up. These kinds of books are where you learn your basics, okay? Courses like this Introduction to Personal Finance, your foundation elements. You need to know what a financial plan is, time value of money, taxes, personal balance sheet, cash flow, budgets, those kinds of things. Then you expand by reading books like this, right? And learning more about how to do tactical things. Where do I save more? What are the best accounts? Where are the best credit cards? When should I use them? When should I pay them off? The influencers are people you hear about, and you can listen to their podcasts and follow them on Instagram and learn more about. That's where the discussion is taking place about personal finance elements, personal financial plans, tactics, and things like that. So thanks for joining me. I'm Tom Mihawk. Stay for section 3, an interview with Hema Ketter, who was a former student of mine about 5 or 6 years ago. He's a terrific young man. He's working for a very large real estate firm called Compass in New York City. He has his own office, partners, and he's going to talk about not keeping up with the Joneses, how he budgets, and some things that he's learned by having personal finance in his life and the way he relies on it. Thanks very much. See you in section 3.